The cafe was quiet that evening, filled only with the soft hum of conversation and the gentle clinking of cups and saucers. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint aroma of pastries, creating a warm and inviting atmosphere. In the corner of the room, near the window, a piano sat quietly, waiting for someone to breathe life into its keys. She had been playing there for months, always quietly, always with modesty, never drawing attention to herself. Her music was soft, unassuming, and yet somehow comforting to everyone who listened. People came not to see her, but to feel the calm her melodies brought, as she adjusted the piano bench and lifted the fallboard. Her fingers brushed over the keys gently. The routine was familiar, soothing. She played the first few notes, simple and soft, filling the room with a melody that seemed to match the evening's gentle mood. Regular customers nodded in approval, some tapping their fingers lightly on their coffee cups in rhythm. For her, these evenings were a simple pleasure. A small corner of the world where she could lose herself in music without expecting anything in return. That night, however, something felt different. A man she had never seen before walked through the door. He was middle-aged, wearing a simple coat and carrying a small bag. He glanced around the cafe, his eyes settling on her at the piano. There was an urgency in his gaze, a quiet desperation that made her pause mid-note. He approached slowly, almost cautiously, as if unsure whether he was welcome. When he reached her, he hesitated, clearing his throat. I heard you play," he said, his voice low and uncertain. Could you play something for me? A song I have in my mind. It's not much, really, but it's very important to me." She looked up at him, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. She had played countless requests from patrons over the months, but there was something about his tone that made her pause. It was not just a casual request. There was weight in his words, a kind of quiet pleading, of course. She replied softly, trying to keep her tone calm and reassuring. "Do you know the notes, or should I play by ear?" He hesitated again, then hummed a simple tune. It was nothing complicated, just a small melody that could easily be overlooked. She listened carefully, her head tilted slightly, absorbing the rhythm and the emotion behind it. The notes were simple, almost ordinary, but there was something raw and heartfelt in the way he hummed them. She nodded gently. "I can work with this. Would you like me to play it now?" He nodded, looking slightly nervous. She positioned her fingers over the keys and began to play. At first, the melody was simple, exactly as he had hummed it. Soft and gentle, almost fragile. The man closed his eyes, leaning slightly forward, as if trying to feel every note deep in his chest. The regular customers watched quietly, sensing that something special was happening, even if they couldn't quite put their finger on it as the music continued. She found herself naturally adding small touches, subtle changes that made the melody feel fuller without changing its essence. Her fingers danced lightly over the keys, exploring harmonies and variations. The simple tune began to grow, not just in sound, but in emotion. Each note carried a little more weight, a little more depth. She felt herself being drawn into the story that the melody seemed to tell. The man opened his eyes slightly, watching her hands move across the keys. There was a tear glistening in the corner of his eye, though he tried to blink it away. She noticed, but she did not stop. She let the music flow naturally, letting her instincts guide her. The simple request had sparked something in her, a desire to take the ordinary and turn it into something extraordinary, even if only for this one person in this small cafe. Minutes passed, though it felt like time had slowed. The cafe was silent except for the piano and the occasional soft sound of a spoon against a cup. Everyone present seemed to be holding their breath, caught in the spell of the music. She felt a strange connection with the man, though she did not know his story. The melody he had asked for was simple, but it carried a weight of personal meaning that she could feel. It was more than just notes. It was emotion, memory, longing. When the last note faded, the room remained silent for a moment, as if no one wanted to break the spell. The man's eyes were shining now, his lips slightly trembling. He looked at her and whispered that was exactly what I needed, more than I could have imagined. "Thank you." She smiled softly, her fingers still resting lightly on the keys. "I'm glad it helped," she said quietly. She did not need to say more. The music had spoken for her. The man lingered for a while, not wanting to leave too quickly. He kept glancing at the piano, at the way her hands had moved over the keys, at the calm and gentle presence she exuded. It was clear that the simple tune he had brought had become something more, a small masterpiece in its own way. Though she had only intended to play a simple request, she realized that she had created something that touched someone's heart deeply. That thought stayed with her long after he left, lingering in the quiet corners of the cafe as the evening went on. She returned to her usual melodies, but she felt a subtle change within herself. The experience of turning a simple request into something meaningful had awakened a quiet confidence. She realized that her music had the power to reach people in ways she had never fully appreciated before. It was not about showing off skill or gaining recognition. It was about connection, about taking something ordinary and making it resonate with the soul. Regular patrons noticed a new depth in her playing. There was a gentleness, yes, but also a quiet strength, a sense that every note had purpose and emotion behind it. Some people left small notes of thanks, expressing how her music had comforted them or brightened their evening. She read these quietly, smiling to herself, feeling a humble pride that did not need words. That night, she closed the cafe and walked home. The memory of the simple request stayed with her. She thought about the man, about the melody, and about how a single moment could unfold into something unforgettable. It was a small reminder that life was full of quiet miracles, waiting to be discovered in unexpected places. And for the first time, she felt ready to embrace those moments. To see where even a simple tune could take her, she sat at her own piano at home later, playing the melody again, not as a task but as a gift. She added small variations, letting her fingers wander, exploring new possibilities. The simple tune that had been requested in a quiet cafe was now alive in her mind, full of potential. And she knew, somehow, that this was only the beginning of something much larger. Something that could touch many more hearts in ways she had not yet imagined. After that night at the cafe, she could not stop thinking about the simple melody that had been requested. It played in her mind like a quiet echo, soft yet persistent. Each time she remembered it, she felt the same gentle pull, the same quiet curiosity about what it could become. She knew that the melody had potential, but she did not yet understand how far she could take it. The idea of transforming something ordinary into something unforgettable excited her. Even as it also made her nervous, she began to spend hours at her own piano at home, trying different variations of the tune. She would sit for long stretches, letting her fingers wander across the keys, testing harmonies, trying new rhythms, and listening closely to the sound she created. At times she would stop and close her eyes, imagining the man at the cafe and the emotions he might feel when hearing a more complete version of his melody. She wanted to honor the simplicity of the tune while adding depth and meaning without overcomplicating it. Each night, she played it differently. One evening, she added soft arpeggios, letting the melody flow like a gentle river. The next night, she experimented with pauses, letting certain notes hang in the air, giving them weight and significance. Sometimes, she would play the original melody alongside her variations, noticing how it changed the feeling, how it spoke differently each time. The process was slow, deliberate, and at times frustrating. There were moments when nothing sounded right, and she would sigh and push herself away from the piano, staring at the ceiling as if looking for inspiration. Yet she always returned. During these sessions, she began to understand the subtle power of the music. A simple melody could evoke memories, hopes, and emotions in ways that words could not. She thought about her own experiences, the quiet moments of her life, the little joys and sorrows she had kept to herself. She let these feelings inform her playing, letting each note carry a small piece of her own heart. The tune, once simple, began to expand. She added layers that made it feel alive, full of emotion and subtle surprises. Her friends and neighbors started noticing her deep focus. Sometimes they would peek into her home and hear the piano filling the quiet evening. They could sense that something was different, that she was not just playing music but exploring something profound. She rarely spoke about it, though. It was a personal journey, one she felt she had to follow alone. And yet, the thought of sharing it again in the cafe of seeing the reaction of the man who had made the request gave her a quiet motivation to continue. She also started paying attention to the small details that made music meaningful. She experimented with dynamics, learning how the softest touch of a finger could convey tenderness, and how a stronger strike could express determination or joy. She tried changing the tempo, making certain sections slower and more reflective, while letting others rise and fall with energy. The melody, once plain and simple, now had a life of its own. It could whisper or shout, smile or weep. Each night, it grew more complete, more expressive. Sometimes, she would write notes on paper, jotting down ideas, small changes she wanted to remember. She found herself speaking to the music, almost as if it were a companion. "What if I try this?" she would murmur, running her fingers over a new chord. Would this make it brighter or sadder? The piano became a friend, a guide, helping her explore the limits of her own creativity. One evening, she noticed that her own feelings were changing along with the music. She felt more confident, more certain that she could take the simple melody and turn it into something truly moving. There were still doubts, moments of hesitation, but they were less frequent. She understood now that her music did not need to impress anyone with technical skill alone. It needed to convey emotion, to tell a story that people could feel in their hearts. This realization was liberating. It gave her the courage to experiment more boldly, to trust her instincts and her intuition. The days passed quietly, each one filled with practice and reflection. She sometimes imagined the man's face as he listened, hoping that her music would touch him as deeply as it had that first night. She remembered the tear in his eye, the way he had leaned forward, completely absorbed in the sound. That memory stayed with her, a reminder that music could bridge the gap between people, that a simple request could become something unforgettable. If approached with care and thought, she also began to think about the other people who might hear the melody someday. She thought about the regulars in the cafe, the strangers passing by, even people far away who might one day listen. Each note, she realized, carried not only her emotions, but the potential to evoke emotions in others. This understanding gave her a sense of responsibility, a desire to craft the melody with care, making it meaningful and memorable. Despite the challenges, she found joy in the process. Each discovery, each small improvement brought satisfaction. Sometimes, she would play late into the night, the quiet city outside her window listening along. The melody had become a companion to her thoughts, a way to explore her own emotions while preparing to touch someone else's heart. She knew that when the time came to perform it again, it would not be the same simple tune. It would be a piece that carried depth, emotion, the dedication of many quiet hours. In the cafe, she sometimes imagined returning and playing it for the man who had requested it. She imagined the look on his face, the small gasp or smile that might escape him. That thought motivated her more than anything. She wanted him to feel the music in a way that was more than just pleasant. She wanted it to resonate, to linger in his memory, to remind him of something important he might have forgotten or needed to feel. Every time she played, she learned something new. She discovered how small changes in timing or pressure could transform a phrase. She noticed how her own feelings influenced the sound, how joy could make the notes brighter, sadness deeper. It was a lesson in mindfulness, in paying attention to the present moment, in being fully present with each key, each note, each sound. Music, she realized, was not just about performance. It was about connection, about listening and responding, about creating something that mattered. By the end of the week, the melody had transformed significantly. It had grown from a simple tune into a flowing, expressive piece that captured the essence of emotion and story. She played it repeatedly, refining small details, making sure each note carried weight, each pause had meaning. It was ready, she felt, to be shared again, to be performed for the man whose request had started this journey. But more than that, she knew that this piece had become something of her own. A reflection of her heart and her understanding of the power of music. She felt a quiet anticipation, a gentle excitement for the moment when she would return to the cafe. She wondered how the man would react, how others might hear it, and what small impact her music might have. The preparation had been long, filled with careful attention and quiet reflection, but it had been worth it. She had learned to trust herself, to explore her creativity, and to understand that even the simplest request could become something extraordinary when approached with care and heart. Sitting at the piano one final time that night, she played the piece from start to finish without stopping. Her fingers moved naturally, flowing with confidence, her heart attuned to every note. She felt a sense of completion, not as an ending, but as a readiness to share this music, to see it live and breathe in the world. The simple request that had seemed so ordinary was now a masterpiece, a creation born from quiet dedication, patience, and love for the art. She leaned back slightly, her hands resting on the keys, and let the last note linger in the air. The silence that followed was not empty, but full of meaning. She smiled softly, knowing that this was only the beginning. The melody was ready to leave her hands and touch someone else's heart, just as it had touched hers during these long, quiet nights of preparation. The evening at the cafe arrived quietly, with the sky turning soft shades of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. The cafe was filled with its usual warmth, the smell of coffee and pastries welcoming anyone who came through the door. Regular customers chatted softly, some reading books, some sharing quiet conversations. In the corner, the piano stood as always, waiting for her to sit and bring it to life. She entered the cafe, carrying a small sheet of notes she had scribbled during her practice sessions at home. Her fingers brushed over the piano keys lightly as she sat down, a small smile on her face. She felt both calm and nervous. She had prepared for this night, worked for many long hours to shape the simple melody into a piece full of depth and emotion. Yet there was a quiet anticipation in her heart, a question of how it would be received, especially by the man who had requested it. Soon after she started tuning the piano softly, the door opened, and he walked in. He had the same simple coat, and his eyes lit up as he noticed her at the piano. His face showed a mixture of curiosity and hope. He was alone, but his presence seemed to fill the room with quiet attention. Some regular customers glanced at him, noticing his focused gaze on her, and a small hush settled over the cafe. It was as if everyone sensed that something special was about to happen. She took a deep breath and positioned her fingers on the keys. She glanced at him briefly, a small nod exchanged between them, and then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, mirroring the simplicity of the original tune he had requested. But slowly, as she let herself immerse in the music, the melody began to transform. It flowed more freely, embracing subtle variations and layers she had practiced for days. Each note seemed to carry emotion, not just from her, but reflecting the longing, hope, and quiet beauty the man had hoped to hear. The man's eyes widened slightly as he listened. He could feel the melody in his chest, each note touching him in ways he had not expected. The music grew, gaining depth and warmth. She moved her fingers with precision and fluidity, allowing her heart to guide the rhythm. Every soft chord, every gentle pause, seemed to carry meaning beyond the simple tune he had hummed. The cafe was silent except for the sound of the piano. The small audience of customers leaning back in their chairs, drawn into the performance as the music continued. She experimented with subtle shifts in tempo and dynamics, giving the melody a life of its own. At times, the tune swelled into a moment of quiet triumph, then softened again into tender reflection. It was no longer just a simple request. It was a story unfolding, each note painting a picture of human emotion. She could feel the connection between her and the man growing stronger with every chord. The music was speaking in a language beyond words, bridging the distance between their hearts. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over him. Memories seemed to surface, small flashes of happiness, sorrow, and hope that the melody seemed to capture perfectly. He had not expected that a simple tune could carry such weight, and yet here it was, alive and rich with feeling. A tear ran down his cheek, and he did not wipe it away, letting the music guide him through emotions he had kept inside for a long time. Other people in the cafe noticed too. Some were visibly moved, leaning forward slightly, caught in the spell of the performance. They whispered to each other, amazed at how something so simple could become so beautiful. The woman at the piano played on, unaware of the reactions around her. She was fully absorbed in the music, her focus absolute. The room seemed to shrink to the space between her hands and the keys, a quiet universe where emotion flowed freely. She let herself add subtle flourishes, small touches that made the melody feel personal and intimate. Each chord progression was deliberate, each pause carefully placed. The story of the melody was unfolding, and she could sense that the man recognized it, understood it, felt it in his own way. She did not need to speak. The music communicated everything necessary. Minutes passed, yet it felt as though time had slowed. Every note held meaning. Every shift in the melody created a ripple of emotion in the room. She glanced occasionally at the man, seeing him absorbed, his expression soft and vulnerable. He was transported by the music, caught in the quiet wonder that a single melody, nurtured with care, could evoke. For her, the experience was just as powerful. She felt the energy of the room, the collective heartbeat of the audience. Responding to the emotions, she poured into the music. As the piece reached its final section, she allowed the melody to slow, to soften, to linger on the keys in a way that invited reflection. Each note stretched gently, giving space for the emotions to settle, to be felt fully. She could feel a quiet satisfaction building within her, knowing that she had accomplished what she had hoped, transforming a simple request into something moving and memorable. The last note resonated in the quiet cafe, leaving a silence that was full of meaning. The man opened his eyes slowly, looking at her with a mixture of awe and gratitude. He rose slightly from his chair, not speaking immediately, as if finding words would not do justice to what he had just experienced. His hands rested lightly on the edge of his table, trembling slightly. He took a deep breath and whispered, almost to himself, "It's perfect. Thank you." Other customers began to clap softly, some whispering words of praise and admiration. The cafe seemed alive in a new way, buzzing quietly with the emotions that had been stirred. She smiled gently, nodding in acknowledgement, but she did not seek attention. Her joy was quiet and internal, born from the knowledge that she had connected with someone through her music, that the melody had touched a heart in a way she could not have imagined. The man lingered for a few more minutes, his eyes fixed on the piano. He finally approached her, his voice slightly shaky. "I never thought a simple tune could become this. You've given it life, emotion, a story. I can't thank you enough." She shook her head gently, smiling. "You gave me the melody? I just helped it find its voice." He nodded, understanding that the credit was shared, though he could sense that her hands and heart had poured much more into the music than he could ever imagine. He left the cafe slowly, taking with him the echo of the performance, a memory that would stay with him long after the notes faded, as the cafe returned to its normal rhythm. She sat at the piano, her hands resting on the keys, feeling a sense of quiet accomplishment. She had taken something ordinary and transformed it into something extraordinary. She realized that this was the true power of music, to turn simplicity into meaning, to connect hearts across space and time. The experience left her both humble and inspired, ready to explore further, to continue transforming simple melodies into stories that could move people in ways words never could. Later that night, as she walked home, she replayed the performance in her mind. She remembered the man's expression, the quiet reactions of the other patrons, and the way the melody had grown from a simple tune into something unforgettable. It was a night she would remember forever, not because of applause or recognition, but because of the profound connection she had felt, the realization that her music could touch someone so deeply. That night marked a turning point for her, a quiet awakening to the full potential of her gift and the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The days after the performance were quiet but full of small surprises. She continued to play at the cafe as usual, but now something had changed. People who had been there during that evening kept returning, hoping to hear the melody again or to witness another performance of the same level of depth. The regulars whispered to each other about the music, their voices filled with wonder and admiration. Some had even brought friends, curious to experience the pianist whose simple tune had turned into something unforgettable. Word spread slowly but surely. Visitors from nearby towns came, drawn by stories of the performance, eager to hear the music that had moved a man so deeply. She played as she always had, quietly and humbly, not seeking attention or praise, but the effect of her music on the audience became more evident each day. People lingered longer at the cafe, drawn to the soft but powerful melodies she produced. Letting the music fill their hearts with emotion, she noticed subtle changes in the way people responded. Some would sit in thoughtful silence, eyes closed, letting the sound wash over them. Others would smile, small tears glistening in their eyes as they felt emotions they hadn't expected to feel in such a simple place. It amazed her how a few notes could reach so deeply into the hearts of strangers, creating connections between people who had never met and would never meet again. Her music had become a bridge, something more than entertainment. It had become an experience. One afternoon, a local music teacher visited the cafe, intrigued by the stories she had heard. She listened quietly from a corner, watching the pianist's fingers move across the keys with grace and confidence. The teacher was impressed not only by the skill but by the ability to communicate emotion through sound. She approached after the performance, offering words of praise and encouragement. She suggested that the pianist could consider sharing her music more widely, performing in other places where people could be moved by it at first. The thought of performing in larger venues made her nervous. She had always played quietly, without seeking recognition. The idea of audiences she did not know, of people unfamiliar with her style or intentions, was daunting. But the encouragement from the teacher, combined with the positive reactions she had already seen, planted a seed of possibility in her mind. She realized that perhaps her music could reach beyond the small cafe, touching hearts that were far away from her modest little world. Meanwhile, the man who had requested the melody returned several times. Each time, he watched her play with the same awe and gratitude. He told her that he could not stop thinking about the performance. The melody had become a source of comfort and inspiration in his life. He shared that he had played it quietly at home, humming it to himself when he needed peace. His simple request, he said, had turned into something far greater than he could have imagined. The pianist felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her efforts had created such an impact, that a melody nurtured with care could continue to resonate with someone long after it had been played. The cafe itself began to feel different. More people came, drawn not only by the food and drinks, but by the music. Regulars took pride in telling visitors about the pianist, about the performance that had transformed a simple tune into a story full of emotion. It became a small community of listeners. People connected by the experience of music and the quiet power of one person's dedication. The pianist remained humble, never demanding attention. But she could see that her music was creating ripples beyond what she had imagined. She continued to refine the melody. Even as she played it regularly at the cafe, each performance was slightly different, allowing her to explore new expressions, new nuances, new emotions within the same framework. The piece became living, breathing, changing with each interpretation, reflecting both her growth and the responses of those who listened. She discovered that music was not static. It was dynamic, alive, and deeply personal. Her gift was not simply in playing notes, but in feeling them, and letting them speak through her to the audience. The recognition she received was quiet but meaningful. People would leave notes of thanks, telling her how the music had brightened a difficult day or provided comfort during a troubling time. Some wrote about memories that surfaced, moments they had forgotten until the melody reminded them. She read these letters quietly, smiling to herself, feeling a profound connection with strangers through the language of sound. It was not fame she sought, but the understanding that her music could touch lives, that it had the power to create a ripple effect reaching beyond her imagination. She also found herself thinking about the responsibilities that came with this gift. Music was not just a hobby or a pastime. It was a way to communicate, to heal, and to inspire. She became more mindful of each note, each phrase, each silence between the sounds. Every time she played, she felt a sense of purpose, knowing that her music could influence the emotions and thoughts of those listening. The melody had started as a simple request, but it had become a vessel for expression, a way to connect human hearts. Visitors to the cafe began to share the music with others, some recording short videos or humming the melody to friends. While she did not seek attention online, she became aware that her music was reaching further than she could ever physically perform. The ripple effect was growing, small at first, then expanding as more people discovered the quiet beauty of her playing. She realized that even a modest, humble effort could have a wide impact if it came from sincerity and heart. Through it all, she remained grounded, never letting the growing recognition change her focus. She continued to play with care, attention, and humility, listening to the emotions the music evoked both in herself and in others. The cafe remained her anchor, the place where the journey had begun, the simple space where a melody had transformed into a story of feeling and connection. She found joy in the small moments, a smile from a listener, a tear quietly shed, a whispered word of thanks each day. She explored new variations of the melody, sometimes improvising during performances, letting the audience hear something fresh yet familiar. The piece became a dialogue between her and those listening, a way for her to speak without words. The melody grew richer, carrying layers of hope, longing, and beauty, allowing listeners to find pieces of themselves within it. It became a shared experience, a bridge connecting hearts and minds through the universal language of music. She also reflected on the man, whose simple request had started it all. She felt gratitude toward him, realizing that his vulnerability and trust had sparked a creative journey that went far beyond a single evening at the cafe. His openness had given her the opportunity to explore the melody fully, to understand its depth, and to touch others with it. She knew that music, like life, often began in unexpected ways, through small gestures that could grow into something extraordinary if nurtured with care. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effect continued to expand. New visitors arrived, drawn by stories word of mouth, and the simple promise of experiencing something moving and meaningful. She remained at her piano, humble and focused, knowing that her role was not to seek recognition, but to share the gift she had been given. Every time she played, she felt the quiet power of the music, the way it connected lives and hearts, creating a sense of unity and shared humanity. She realized that this was the true beauty of her journey. It had started with a simple request, an ordinary tune. It had grown into a living experience that touched many people in small but meaningful ways. She understood that her gift was not just for herself, but for those who listened, for those who needed comfort, joy, or reflection. The music had become more than sound. It had become a connection, a legacy of emotion and care that could continue to ripple through time. And so she played day after day, allowing the melody to evolve, to breathe, to reach new hearts. She felt a quiet pride, not in fame or recognition, but in the knowledge that she could transform the ordinary into something unforgettable. Each note, each pause, each soft chord carried her dedication, her heart, and her understanding of what it meant to connect with others through music. The ripple effect of her performance had grown, touching lives far beyond what she had imagined, and she knew that this was only the beginning of the journey ahead. Months had passed since that quiet night, when a simple request had changed everything. The cafe had become a small hub of music lovers and curious visitors, eager to experience the pianist whose melodies carried emotion and warmth. She continued to play, her performances now richer, more confident, yet always grounded in humility. She had learned that the music was not about applause or recognition. It was about connection, and every note was a bridge to someone's heart. One day, a letter arrived, slipped under the door of the cafe. It was from a local cultural organization inviting her to perform at a small concert hall for a community event. They had heard about the stories, the ripple effect her music had created, and wanted others to experience it. She hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready to perform outside the familiar walls of the cafe. Yet, a quiet excitement stirred within her. Perhaps this was the next step, a way to share her music with people who might need it, who might find solace and inspiration in the melodies she created. She spent days preparing, returning to the melody that had started it all. But this time, she allowed herself to explore even further, adding subtle variations, experimenting with emotion and dynamics in ways she had only dreamed of. Each evening, She played through the piece slowly, carefully, letting her heart guide her hands. She could feel the music growing, evolving, becoming something larger than she had ever imagined. And yet, she remained true to the simplicity that had given it life in the first place. When the night of the performance arrived, she entered the concert hall quietly. The hall was small, but filled with people, their faces a mixture of anticipation and curiosity. She noticed the man who had requested the melody months before. Sitting in the front row, his eyes filled with warmth and encouragement. Seeing him there gave her a sense of calm and purpose. This was not just a performance. It was a continuation of the journey that had begun with a single, humble request. She sat at the grand piano, her fingers brushing lightly over the keys. The hall was silent, the audience waiting. She closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes were soft, almost like a whisper, familiar yet imbued with the richness of her preparation. As the melody unfolded, it grew, carrying layers of emotion she had discovered in months of practice. Each chord was deliberate, each pause thoughtful, each phrase a story unfolding in sound. The audience was captivated. Some leaned forward, holding their breath. Some closed their eyes, letting the music fill their hearts. The melody moved with a natural flow, rising and falling like a gentle tide, carrying with it moments of joy, reflection, and quiet triumph. The man in the front row listened intently, tears glistening in his eyes as he felt the evolution of the melody he had once hummed so simply. The music, nurtured with care and dedication, now had a life of its own. Touching hearts far beyond the cafe where it began, she continued to play, letting intuition guide her fingers. She experimented with dynamics, moving from softness to intensity, allowing the piece to breathe and grow. She added subtle flourishes, not for show, but to deepen the emotion, to make every note resonate. The audience felt it too, their own emotions flowing with the music, hearts connecting to hers in a quiet, profound understanding. The melody had become more than sound. It had become a shared experience, collective journey of feeling and reflection. As the final notes lingered in the hall, the silence that followed was full of emotion. People were moved, some wiping tears, others whispering softly to themselves. She let the last chord fade naturally, her hands resting lightly on the keys. The man in the front row stood slowly, clapping gently, a look of awe and gratitude on his face. Soon, the rest of the audience joined, applause filling the hall, not for virtuosity alone, but for the depth of feeling she had conveyed. She smiled softly, a quiet pride warming her heart. This was more than she had imagined, yet she remained humble. She knew that the music was a gift, one that connected people in ways words could not. It had started with a simple request, yet it had grown into something extraordinary, capable of touching hearts far and wide. And she understood that this was the true power of music, to transform, to connect, and to inspire. After the concert, many people approached her, expressing their gratitude and admiration. They spoke of how the music had moved them, how it had reminded them of important moments, of emotions long forgotten or newly discovered. Each story touched her deeply, reinforcing her understanding of her gift and its impact. She listened quietly, smiling, grateful for the chance to share something so intimate and powerful with others. Even the man who had requested the melody spoke again, his voice trembling with emotion. "You've given the music a life I never imagined. It's more than I hoped for, more than I could have asked for. Thank you for letting it grow, for letting it touch all of us." She shook her head gently, replying softly, "You gave me the seed. I only helped it bloom." In the weeks that followed, her story and her music continued to spread. More invitations came, not for fame, but for the opportunity to share the emotion, the connection her music could create. She continued to perform at the cafe, at small events, and occasionally at slightly larger venues, always focusing on the heart of the music rather than recognition. Each performance was unique, reflecting her own growth and the evolving relationship between the melody and her audience. She often thought back to that quiet night when the simple request had arrived at the cafe. It seemed almost miraculous that such a small gesture could have grown into something so powerful. She realized that greatness often begins in simplicity, in quiet moments of trust and vulnerability, in small seeds nurtured with care and dedication. The experience had taught her patience, humility, and the importance of listening to both the music and the people it touched at home. She continued to refine and explore, knowing that music was a journey rather than a destination. She experimented with new melodies, inspired by the understanding that even the simplest ideas could become something unforgettable if approached with intention and heart. Her piano had become a space of exploration, reflection, and expression, a place where she could transform ordinary moments into extraordinary experiences.